We wanted to shoot on large format for the immersive quality.
But this immersive capacity that this format has, I just can't speak highly enough. So Sinners, we shot on the big boy format. This is what we call large format in motion picture photography. It's just 65 millimeter.
Movies feel like they're getting bigger. They're getting taller, wider.
It did take a minute to get a little bit used to the width of what this could see.
And with this, we're getting a return to that widespread myth that these large immersive formats come with their own distinctly special large format look.
VistaVision was a format that was invented to try to figure out how to use more of a larger portion of the 35 millimeter camera negative. So in other words, bigger is better.
So obviously, even more resolution, even shallower depth of field.
From a shallower depth of field,
You can get the same field of view on a longer lens, which is obviously minimizes distortion.
to a completely unique perspective. But do they? Well, let's get into that and hopefully squash this fallacy once and for all. You've likely heard the assertion that larger formats will give you a shallower depth of field. But there are only 4 factors that have a direct impact on depth of field: focal length, distance to the subject, the acceptable circle of confusion size, and aperture. Notice that format size is absent, and yet the misconception persists. But what exactly is depth of field? The American Cinematographer Manual defines it as the region in front of and behind the plane of principal focus in which an object photographs as an image of acceptable sharpness. It is a concept of useful application within limits. Note within limits, as in depth of field doesn't actually have any sharply defined limits. I think instead of focusing on depth of field, it can be more helpful to first focus on angle of view. An easy way to understand this is that taking the same camera in the same position, a shorter lens will give you a wider angle of view than a longer lens. This is why we often refer to shorter focal length lenses as wide-angle lenses. So how does depth of field factor in here? Take this scene from 2017's The Killing of a Sacred Deer. Here the camera is zooming out from the subject. The lens is progressively moving from a longer focal length to a shorter one. As expected, the shorter focal length lens gives a wider angle of view, while the longer focal length lens gives a narrower angle of view. And remember, focal length does affect depth of field. So at that shorter focal length, you get a deeper depth of field, while at the longer focal length, you get a shallower depth of field. Now people often take this to mean that longer lenses compress the space, while shorter lenses stretch it. And while sure, you can find many examples highlighting this, it's not exactly true. But to understand this, we need to not only address depth of field, but also perspective. While depth of field is determined by a number of factors, perspective is determined by precisely one: the distance from the camera to the subject, that is, position. Take this clip from Paul Thomas Anderson's camera test for Phantom Thread. Here the camera is dollying in. As it does so, it gets progressively closer to the subject so that the starting position is considerably further than its ending position. Now, as the camera dollies in, the field of view narrows. However, notice the difference between the foreground and background of the image. Notice the difference in perspective. To return to our zoom example, as the camera zooms out, the lens transitions from a longer focal length to a shorter one. The depth of field gets increasingly deeper. Because of this, the angle of view widens. At the start of the zoom, when the lens is at its longest focal length, the image appears more magnified. Objects in both the foreground and background have increased in size, but to the same relative extent as one another. In other words, the perspective has not changed. Now, if we return to our dolly example, as the camera dollies in, it gets increasingly closer to the subject. The depth of field gets increasingly shallower. Yes, the field of view narrows, but see the difference in the background? Notice the perspective is also changing. This is because perspective is affected precisely by one thing: position. So as the camera dollies in, we're not changing the focal length, but we are changing our camera position. As the camera gets closer, objects in the foreground increase in size at a faster rate than objects in the background. Thus, changing the camera position changes perspective. Put another way, it's not the focal length that is responsible for this so-called compressing or stretching of an image, but the distance between the subject and the camera. A quick example of this is the often repeated but incorrect assertion that wide-angle lenses have a distorting effect. Again, sure, you can find examples highlighting this, but it's still not exactly true. You've probably even experienced this phenomenon yourself. What's the first thing you do when you're greeted with your exaggerated appearance on the front-facing camera of your iPhone? You pull your phone away from your face to get a more natural and less exaggerated appearance in the frame. This is why using focal length as a shorthand for a given perspective can be a bit misleading. This is also why saying longer lenses compress the space while shorter lenses stretch it is not correct. Still not convinced? Take a look at this scene. You've got a relatively deep focus effect going on here, and we often associate this style of cinematography with wider lenses. But this was not shot on a wide lens. As a matter of fact, throughout the 50s, Kurosawa often used telephoto lenses and yet was still able to maintain this deep focus style. How? Common knowledge would hold that a longer lens would give you a shallower depth of field, but focal length is not the only factor affecting this. Remember, depth of field is affected by 4 factors. So, to get a deeper depth of field, Kurosawa had to close down the aperture while increasing the distance between his camera and his subject. And recall, changing one's position will also change an image's perspective. So now that we understand how various lenses can impact an image, let's talk about how format size factors in here.
Somebody take me.
From 70mm to VistaVision to IMAX, movies definitely feel like they're getting bigger, and so are the myths surrounding depth of field and perspective. But why do these misconceptions persist? I think it goes back to the idea of what we expect a movie to look like.
This right here is 35mm film. This was the format for the majority of the industry history.
While 35mm and full-frame digital sensors have become the format we most strongly associate with films today, believe it or not, there was a brief period where it seemed like large format celluloid could become the standard.
So what we have here for comparison's sake is our 68mm nitrate print, our Mutoscope and Biograph print, next to a standard 35mm Edison print of an 1896 film. I mean, it's kind of like the IMAX of its day, right?
But for various reasons, 35mm prevailed, in varying shapes and sizes, to become the format we most strongly associate with the Hollywood films we're used to seeing on the big screen today. Obviously, it would be absurd to claim that all 35mm films look the same, but the point is, today we now often associate specific lenses with specific perspectives, regardless of format size. To return to field of view, consider this scene from David Lean's 65mm epic, Ryan's Daughter. If this same image were to be shot on a smaller format, it would have a narrower field of view. It's going to have a greater crop factor. But contrary to popular assumptions, the depth of field and perspective will not have changed between these two images. So what's going on here? Why do so many people claim that format size has a direct impact on depth of field? Well, if we want to maintain the subject size of the smaller format image, we will need to change something. One option is to change to a longer lens, which gets us the same perspective, but with a decrease in the overall depth of field. To look at another large format example, consider this scene from 2023's Oppenheimer. Again, we know this same image, when shot on a smaller format, will have a narrower field of view. So if we want to maintain the subject size of the smaller format image, we will need to, again, change something. What if we simply move the camera closer to the subject? Again, we get a decrease in depth of field, but now we're also changing perspective. Look at how the relationship between the foreground and background has completely changed. However, contrary to popular belief, it is not the large format size that is responsible for these visual changes. Format size is not the limiting factor in any of these examples, and yet it's easy to fall into the trap of believing larger formats have a recognizable quality, unique perspective, or distinct look that is unattainable on other formats, especially with all the misinformation that's out there. But this is a misconception, a fallacy, and frankly, one that needs to end.